given what's happened this week, how would you rate the chances of a trade deal?
Well, good morning. I think what's happened this week has certainly set us back. Essentially, if you look at the process here, we've spent a number of years working very hard to negotiate an overall withdrawal agreement. We've worked very hard, in particular on the Northern Ireland Protocol, to do a number of things, but most importantly, to protect the Northern Ireland peace process. This is a deal that was reached. It was voted through the UK Parliament 9 months ago. It was voted through the European Parliament 9 months ago. And now this week, one side of the agreement essentially has decided to unilaterally, on its own, change elements of that agreement. So it's caused, I think, some confusion, or a lot of confusion. I think it has in some way damaged trust between both sides. It's very difficult to see how you can negotiate a free trade agreement when what has already been agreed is being proposed to be breached less than 9 months later. So we're in a very difficult space. What I would like to see, and I think the Irish Government but the European Union would like to see, is that these particular measures as contained in the Internal Market Bill, that they are withdrawn, and most importantly that we get back to the very important business of implementing what has already been agreed in the withdrawal agreement, and of course trying to negotiate a free trade agreement by the end of the year, and the time frame, as you know, is very short for that as it is.
To know on how the EU intends to react to this, because the European Commission said on Thursday that they won't be shy in using the mechanisms and legal remedies available to address violations of the withdrawal agreement. So could the EU really take legal action against the UK, or look at imposing sanctions on the UK?
Well, if this were to be followed through, if this bill was to be implemented, then, as your own ministers have clearly said, it would be a breach of an international agreement. We don't want it to get to that stage. And, you know, any suggestion that these amendments or these proposals in this bill, that they're there to protect the peace process in Northern Ireland, that they're there for a specific reason, we already have spent a number of years working through a mechanism as to how we can protect Northern Ireland, how we can prevent a border from re-emerge, and how we can protect that unfettered access between Northern Ireland and the UK.
What happens if they do go ahead and try and overrule the withdrawal agreement? What would the EU do? Would you take legal action against the UK, or could you impose sanctions?
Well, firstly, I think it would be extremely damaging if that were to be the case. We're still trying to negotiate and to finalise a free trade agreement, and I don't have to tell you, if we do not reach an agreement, the implications that that will have, not just for the UK but for the whole of the EU as well. We don't want to get to that point. We want to ensure that what has already been agreed, it can be implemented. There are already mechanisms within the Northern Ireland Protocol, within the withdrawal agreement, where there are disagreements, where there are questions as to how things can be implemented. There are already mechanisms there to address that. So if this were to be progressed,
you don't want it
obviously,
to happen.
well, we would have to look and see.
Get to that point. I understand that you don't want to get to that point, but I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what happens if you do get to that point, because frankly, this is what the UK government has said it intends to do. It's not, you know, just plucking it out of nowhere. Could the EU take legal action or sanctions against the UK?
Well, this is something that could happen. I think other implications are also, as I've mentioned, the overall trade agreement that would certainly and is certainly at risk if this is to be implemented. I think the implications for the UK as a whole, I heard two of your own former Prime Ministers talk about the detrimental impact that this will have on any other kind of arrangement or agreement between the UK and any other country. So, I mean, the possible implications of this are not just the relationship between the UK and the EU, but go much further beyond that. But again, we have to go back to what is actually happening here. We have an agreement. We've spent a long time trying to negotiate it. It's taken compromise on both sides. It has been difficult, but it has been agreed. We do not want to see one side breaching that agreement, because the implications, the ramifications for that are absolutely huge. But in particular, coming back to the Northern Ireland peace process, I've heard this week from a number of speakers that these measures and that this bill in particular, that it's there to protect the Northern Ireland peace process, that it's there to provide clarity, that it's there to provide for the principle of consent. That is simply not true. We have already mechanisms in the Northern Ireland Protocol that protect Northern Ireland, that protect its position within the UK, that protect its unfettered access to the UK market, but also to the single market, and most importantly, it prevents a border from re-emerging on this island. So how these new measures are going to do that when it's already there, I simply don't understand that.
I wonder if you could help me get to the bottom of something, because Boris Johnson claimed this weekend that the EU threatened a full-scale trade border down the Irish Sea, which could effectively block the transport of food between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that's why he had to introduce the Internal Markets Bill. Was that threat made?
That's simply not the case. The Northern Ireland Protocol, as I've said, we've spent years negotiating it. There are compromises on both sides. What it essentially does is it ensures the integrity of Northern Ireland as part of the UK. It ensures that we do not see any kind of a border re-emerging. It protects the access of Northern Ireland goods and its market into the rest of the UK, but also ensures unfettered access to the single market and customs union. And as part of that agreement, as part of those discussions, we've had to ensure that there are safety mechanisms in place, that you don't have any unfair kind of advantages. But any suggestion that what was agreed, what was voted through by the Parliament, what last week was said by the First Minister in Northern Ireland as an international agreement, something that had to be implemented, any suggestion that this is going to create any new borders, it's simply not true. There are already checks on certain goods going from the UK into Northern Ireland. That has always been the case. What we're simply doing here is making sure, as part of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that there are mechanisms in place to ensure that there is no unfair advantage.
OK, just finally, trust, of course, is a big part of any negotiation. Do you trust Boris Johnson?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Apologies.
I was just going to ask you, as trust is such an important part of any negotiation, do you trust Boris Johnson?
Well, trust is an extremely important part of any negotiation, and what I would not like to see, given, I think, how much Britain has been to the fore of international law, what I do not want to see is any bill implemented that could potentially breach that, and certainly could breach any trust between us and them, or us and the UK. So, you know, we want and are asking, and the EU is asking as a whole, that these particular mechanisms within the bill be redacted.